Welcome to Pandora's Box Chat Show. It is Tuesday night at 8 and as always we're bringing you lots of information. Today's episode we are focusing on the Children's Act and what the government is doing to protect children in these circumstances. With me today, as always, Felicity guest and our very, very special guest today, Lorraine Morko. Lorraine, thank you so much for joining us. Felicity, welcome back.
Thank you. Hi.
Lorraine, so tell us all about your work that you're doing. You do amazing work in the community. You are from our neck of the hoods. You're also a candidate for the ANC in Ward 64 and so much more. So please do tell us all about it.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you for the time and opportunity. Yes, I'm a social worker, I'm a child protection officer, I'm a community liaison. In a way, I work with the community in general. I work for the community of Vrygrond. Vrygrond is a community of more than 40,000 people with an estimated 9,200 children. So the age group of the children varies from birth up until the age of 18 because we define a child as such, a person under the age of 18. So briefly, this is who I am. I am married, I've got children of my own. They are aged 11 and 6, so I'm very passionate around the care of children.
I think what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Children's Act first. So Felicity, with all the knowledge that you've gained over the years, can you just give our listeners just a bit of a quick summary of what the Children's Act is?
Yes, absolutely. So while we don't really focus on the Children's Act, where it's very important in our space is obviously with co-parenting and the protection of children coming out of families where there is domestic violence, etc. So yes, I have a fair amount of knowledge. So this is essentially what the Children's Act does. It governs the laws relating to the care, the contact and the protection of children. It defines the parental responsibilities and rights, and it makes provision for the establishment of children's courts. Although the High Court is seen as the upper guardian, the appointment of social workers and childcare expert officers. The Act also regulates the establishment of places of safety, orphanages, and the rights of orphans as set out in the laws for their adoption. And in the case guiding the principles of the best interest of the child. It covers so much.
You know, I just want to add on what Felicity is sharing in terms of the custodians of child protection. Social development, Leila, on its own is known as the custodians of child protection. But the capacity they do not have, because you've got so many children and so little professionals that can literally look after the rights of children. So in turn, they prioritize abuse. In turn, they prioritize also with abuse, what kind of abuse. And you will realize that so far, you've got the Child Protection Register. What that means, it's based only on sexual activity. But in terms of abandonment, of neglect, of beating up a child, there is no such register. And that is where the concern is. Because a child, you look at a child in totality. You do not look at a child only as a sexual being. But our laws, and of course, with sexuality, the effect is a bit longer, or it is lifetime for that matter, of if a child is abused sexually, the consequences are longer. The consequences are emotionally lifetime. So that becomes what is prioritized. And of course, I don't want to say the government is not doing much. I don't want to say social development is not doing much. But with the Children's Act, having started as Child Care Act in 2005, and rewind to, 1995, 1996, when they brought the Children's Rights and Children's Charter, there is so much that still needs to be done in terms of protecting a child. And of course, Felicity is correct when she speaks of there is specialities in terms of looking after a child. You get those that are generic social workers. You get those that are generic attorneys, lawyers, that look at the rights of a child in general. But when you have to look at specifics in terms of maintenance, in terms of adoption, in terms of sexuality, in terms of education, then it kind of makes it a little bit difficult in terms of looking at the protection of the child. Yeah.
So we've mentioned quite a few aspects under the Children's Act, and of course the main thing is here that children need protection if they're under a certain age. Under which circumstances have you found, Lorraine, that it's most needed, especially in communities such as Vrygroot?
It's needed across all ages with a child. As long as they are under the age of 18, they have to be protected. You get to see children actually looking after other children. We've got a lot of child-headed households. In terms of Vrygroot, it's different because the parent leaves home early hours of the morning and the parent comes back way after 7. During the day, who looked after the child? You get cases such as a parent would have left home and when they come back, their house is destroyed. You could have gotten cases where you hear that there's been a protest. The protest is based on the fact that a child's home was destroyed by government. Who was at the home at the time? Not the child, not the parent. By the time the parent comes back, it's 7 p.m. The child is staring at their home that is now on the ground.
There was a case like that now recently.
3 weeks ago. And that is why you get the unrest that affects even the affluent communities. Because where a child is concerned, it concerns all of us.
I mean, I know, Felicity, we spoke about the process of the maintenance court, and maybe this can be another episode where we actually go step by step. But just in a quick overall nutshell, what would be the process if I see a child being neglected or abused? What would I do?
Well, generally people approach a social worker or Department of Social Development or an NGO that has social workers. If there is sexual abuse or physical violence, they might approach SAPS. And SAPS have a victim charter that they're supposed to follow. But once again, not many of them follow the victim charter. So because there's so many bad stories around going to SAPS, people, that's not their first choice. So they try and look for a social worker to actually intervene. And then through the assistance of the social worker, it then gets taken through the correct legal process of going to SAPS and trying to put them into places of safety.
Under what circumstances would the courts then put a protection plan in place, and when they do, what would that practically mean?
Basically, when a child is reported to social workers, almost the first day that we will receive the child, there must be a protection plan, almost immediately. However, with capacity, it takes time. I mean, I've got cases where myself working in an NGO, everything has to be referred to social development, or it has to be referred to an organization that can do statutory. In other words, they can stand before court. So when they stand before court, they will go there and present the case of the child, write a report, and it's a lengthy report that speaks to certain aspects. And it can be anything from environment, risk, the capacity of the parent, and what has been done so far in terms of the child. And that on its own speaks to what we call a protection plan, a child protection plan. So a child protection plan is a document, and is a document that has all these aspects around.
So all the various aspects.
All the various
and
aspects.
I think that's
so
probably the maintenance issue would also come in there, right?
It will also come in there. But then there are 4 main things that we look at. Is the development, is the family and the environment, is the risk, and the parenting capacity.
Okay.
Yes, so it's all about the environment of the child.
So Felicity, you know, we spoke a lot about interim orders for maintenance and all of these things. Is there an interim order for child protection?
Not for child protection really in the same way. It would be for co-parenting, yes. You can get an interim order for co-parenting, but it depends what the problem is. And we hear it often that in parent alienation, one of the things that are used to create the alienation is a sexual abuse issue is raised. And the moment a sexual abuse issue is raised, the authorities are compelled to intervene.
How do you, especially in your Vrygrond community, mobilize the people to understand the importance of the non-profits and the organizations and the churches and the mosques and all of those organizations that are really part and parcel of the community, that are really the stronghold where government can't reach and government can't get in time? Because we've said, 3 years for maintenance. I don't even want to know what's the backlog on children's issues.
You know, reality is that our organizations are working in silos. Government is on its own, NGOs on their own, schools on their own, churches on their own. Somewhere along the lines, there must be where they come together under one roof. And in Vrygrond, that is the main goal for myself working there, to say that I will knock in social development. I will not get the 2 schools that are there because they've got social workers. I will not get the NGOs that have got social workers. So far, the NGOs that are there, only the Sozo Foundation has a social worker. The other 2 that are there have got social auxiliary workers. And there is one that works with ECDs, Early Childhood Development Centers. They've got a social auxiliary worker that was placed by the Department of Social Development. So the best method would be definitely to bring all of those under one roof and be able to ask, where can one start and end? If there is street committees, the activist part of things kick in, where an activist will say, I found the 2-year-old and the 7-year-old walking together at 9 p.m. 9 p.m. a child that age shouldn't be at the streets.
Should be in bed.
Should be in bed already. But then reality is that mom is doing night shift. Neighbor was just asked to say, you know what, put the kids to sleep, lock them in.
So we've clearly addressed what the problem in our communities are, and there are plenty. We've also looked at the Children's Act being put in place for the protection of those children. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back we're going to look more at the solutions for those problems and see what is happening in certain communities and what people are doing in order to make it happen. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Pandora's Box. Before the break, we looked at the Children's Act and the problem that we are dealing with in our society, not just in the impoverished communities, but also in the more affluent areas. Our children are safe on a day-to-day basis. I think it's easier to say, well, it's my children and I'm working and I'm doing what I can do to keep my kids safe, so it's your responsibility. But that's a far cry from the reality. Perhaps in our affluent areas, that's pretty much, the case. But certainly if I see a child that's lost or that's crossing the road that shouldn't, the same with animals, you'll go out and you'll reach out and you'll try and help. I think in communities like Vrygrond, Lavender Hill and so many others, it's a dire need, it's a huge problem. What are we doing in our communities at present to help alleviate, and what can we do more? What can we advise people to do more to make sure that children are protected?
I think that a priority of our government to start with needs to be on social security. which includes finances, because if a mother is earning minimum wages, let's talk about the single mother, but I mean there are a lot of parents with both parents that are both earning minimum wages. They just don't have the capacity to be able to do the basics to protect a child. I mean, ideally, you would like to be able to put your child into a care facility while you were at working. But as Lorraine was saying, I mean, some parents leave home at 4 o'clock in the morning. Who opens a care facility at 4 o'clock in the morning? So then it's neighbor, will you look after it? And then, so the responsibility is put onto somebody else. And I think that's often where the problems occur, or the child becomes vulnerable and exposed to danger, are in those in-between periods. But so I think certainly it's critical that our socioeconomics are really taken into account, and where they are impoverished area, then those things need to be provided. And also that the communities, we need to go back to the old days. I remember growing up, and I wasn't in an affluent area. I could not do a thing wrong because every single neighbor was watching me, just as we were all watching everybody else. And if any of us did anything wrong, or if anybody looked like they were in danger, people came out from everywhere. And my mother knew everything that we were getting up to all the time. And I think that's a big part of it. We need to kind of go back to those times where we actually care, and that we all, that village, that we all care, because we have limitations. It's a reality. So how are we going to work within those limitations to protect us, children, ourselves?
So Lorraine, you know, if there's a Pandora out there that is living in Vrygrond, and she works in, let's say, in Constantia, and she needs to leave very early in the morning to go and do what, like you suggested, you know, let's use the example of she's a child carer for somebody else's children, and she has a small little child at home. What could she do in order not to leave her children at home?
Sure. You know, the fact that we are sitting here as women with children,
yeah,
and talking Pandora's case, we are the architects of how child care has to look like in the future. Papers, legislation cannot govern reality. There is big gaps. And of course, she would love to have somebody looking after her children. But with a minimum wage of 1,200 and sometimes far less than that, she must still pay that other woman from 4 a.m. when she leaves to 7 p.m. when she comes back. Her whole salary will end up there.
So what's the alternative? Are there non-profits that are supportive in that case?
The alternative, and I will mention one organization in an area called Mamelodi in Pretoria, where they've started an aftercare, ECD aftercare. Preferably there must be that, where a parent knows, I am going to leave my child with somebody that is already graduated from being a child minder, while she herself has got small children. And there is no legislation so far that says a mother who has got children under the age of 5 shouldn't be working. Preferably there should be that. That is now with me dreaming something that might not even be able to happen. But education is by far the main key in terms of educating our communities to open their eyes, to open their ears, but to also be proactive in terms of looking out for one another. That is why here in Africa we've got a saying that says it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes a community, it takes a suburb, it takes a township to raise a child. It can be done. I mean, I live in a community in Marinadagama. Our WhatsApp groups are looking out for one another. Technology has allowed for us to open our eyes everywhere. Where you see a dog, you put in the WhatsApp group. Where you see a child, you put in the WhatsApp group. It's not that it's not doable. it is doable, but the education behind it in our townships is not there in terms of look out for one another. Not every woman is employed. And if there can be women in our communities that say, I've got a heart, like the heart of Felicity, that can go out and speak directly or even indirectly with women and say, look men, I am working and I'm leaving 4 a.m., but you are at home. You are not employed, you've got small children. Can I add to your basket with a stipend that when I leave, I know I'm leaving my children with you? The process, yes, is very tedious in terms of a person who looks after children, they must be screened as fit and proper. What that means is that you must be sure that when you leave your child, the boyfriend of that woman will not abuse your child. The husband of that woman will not abuse your child.
I was going to add now, the responsibility and probably the reason why a lot of women are not willing to take on somebody else's child, because like you said, as a social worker, you can get into trouble. What if under your care, that person's child, something happens, he chokes or anything happens? I mean, the responsibility is so great that I think, especially today, people to kind of veer away from wanting to take that responsibility. So how do we solve this? I think probably in like you said, in an ideal world, it would be government making money available so that we can have ECDs that are properly run as organizations in every community where people can feel, I can leave my child here. So schooling with ECD, early learning centers and childcare, that is government funded, that especially for people under a certain income bracket.
Yeah, they also, in the health sector, they have healthcare workers who go into the community and they get a daily rate. And, there's lots of creative ways of looking for solutions. And as Lorraine said, everybody's working in silos. So we all need to be coming around and sitting at the table and bashing out some constructive solutions.
So right now, I'm still thinking of Pandora. Right now, if she's watching the show and she's in this predicament, who can she phone? Where can she go to? What would be your advice from both of you ladies? I'm thinking probably if she's part of a church, she could go to a church group and ask help. If there is a non-profit, maybe they would have a database of people that might be doing childcare and maybe they could assist, or a GoFundMe or whatever. What would your suggestion be for her? Because I'm all about practical solutions. What can we do today to make her life easy?
If Pandora is going to work at 4 o'clock in the morning, I think that our first go-to place would be our family. And if you don't have family, your close friends. Because the truth is in most impoverished communities, there is nothing. I think there just is nothing.
Ideally, I think Pandora can start something herself. Because from where we are at right now, churches are not empowered. ECDs are not empowered. Schools are not empowered. In terms of when they release a child 1:20 p.m. to go back home, they do not know to who is this child going. Affluent communities will say that a child will not leave the gate if there is no parent or a responsible adult to pick up that child. But I can tell you now, in the 2 schools that are in Vrygrond, Pandora will have to be trusting somebody supreme, if she believes in God, that when her child gets off from school, she comes back 7 p.m., the child will still be fine. So I think the best solution will be for her to say, I am first and foremost the victim. And the solutions will not come from somebody else. It must be started by me, because I've got an issue. Almost all NGOs I know have started because somebody felt the pain. And somebody did not want people to go through the same. And if she can start, she'll be amazed the number of women that will follow suit in supporting that call, because of this is reality. So many women don't have the capacity financially, don't have the capacity. Here in Western Cape, it's even worse. because the majority of our women, and specifically our black women, they come from Eastern Cape.
Yeah.
There is no family. With their children, they just leave them. And they come back. The amount of children that die per annum is alarming. And we're looking at statistics on Friday in another area where we were talking to the number of children that Red Cross has seen in terms of children that are injured, children that die in the care of their own parents. It's more than 500, and this is just June, that which we are talking about, 500 children that are already dead.
I think the problem is multifold. I mean, we touched on a few issues, and I think there's way too many issues to discuss in such a short space of time. And Lorraine, I think definitely when we have our season 2, we're going to bring you back and we're going to unpack more. I would love to come and visit Sozo Foundation as well, and see more of what you guys do, because I've read a little bit about it and I think the work that you guys are doing is amazing. I honestly think if I was Pandora, I would want my boss to have more empathy. And I think that's maybe where the solution is starting. So I want to appeal to those affluent people out there that are watching the show. If you are in a position, and I know finances are really tough, we are all struggling and we're all doing a little bit to help where we can, but if you are in a position to help your worker in any way with their children, to keep their children safe, I think that's the least we can do to contribute in our own way in our societies. It's going to take time. Lorraine, I think you are very active in government, you are active in non-profit, you're active in a church, doing an amazing job. I think if we have the ability to duplicate people like yourself and Felicity, we'd have a wonderful society, but the reality is, it's not always like that. If we can mobilize our neighbors and our community workers and have every person do a little bit, I think we'll have fantastic communities. So in closing, if I can just ask one closing comment from each of you, what would you say in closing would be your ideal situation, and focusing on the solution for today? What is your solution for today, Felicity?
My solution for today is that I think that we have to have more meetings in communities, open forums, open discussions, open dialogues. We have to just start communicating and talking about the problems. It all starts in community. So if we can encourage communities to come back together in a caring way, to like mediation, for them to come to their own solutions, because I'm sure amongst them they'll actually find incredible solutions that are very pertinent to their own personal circumstances. But it needs to be done in a positive, loving, caring way, and not ordered, instructed. Like, we have a meeting at 6 o'clock, you better all get down there, and because you're neglecting your children, that kind of thing. I'm not too sure, but was if somebody out of kindness invited me to this incredible place where magic is going to happen, I'd want to go. So how to pitch it.
We need a Pandora's box in every community, right?
Yes.
And we're working on it. Yeah. In closing, Lorraine,
I will also support that, which Felicity has said. It takes a village, a township, a suburb to raise a child. Let's bring back the values of family, of community. Let's bring back the professional values of networking. This thing of working in silos, Marna Dagama is Marna Dagama, Vrygrond is Vrygrond, Muizenberg is Muizenberg, it must fall. If I'm to use the language of today, it must fall. The child of Vrygrond must be the child of Marna Dagama, must be the child of Muizenberg. We should be concerned with the children generally. We should be concerned what happens to the well-being of children. Yes, the legislation and the laws can govern, but it must find us already somewhere. I think from my side, ideally, that is all I can be able to say in terms of looking after children.
Ladies, thank you so much for giving me your time. Felicity, as always, I think another wonderful episode with lots of information. Again, as I said, there's just too much to unravel in one episode. You are doing amazing work, Lorraine. I really take my hat off to you for all you're doing in the community and to help people feel maybe just a little bit of hope, which is, of course, what Pandora's Box is all about. There's always hope. That's what we believe. I look forward to doing lots more with you in the future, and I think we are going to see lots more of each other, and we've got big plans for Pandora's Box. That's it. We'll leave it there for tonight. Until next time. Good night.